Welcome back. Thank you for getting back on time. And thank you also for those of you at home watching. Please go ahead if you can't be here today. If those folks cannot be here today, they're still chained to their desks. Remind them they can watch us live. We're streaming at tech.state.gov/live. And also, all the materials that was presented here today is available on tech.state.gov. So if you missed any of the slides from Mindel's great presentation, please find them on tech.state.gov. So now, I would like to introduce to you our plenary panel will be starting shortly, which is on Mobile is Changing the World. How will it change diplomacy? So I have the honor of introducing to you my boss, Mr. Eric Nelson, the Director of eDiplomacy. Eric previously served as Chargé d'Affaires and Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in San Jose, Costa Rica, which became a leader in promoting public-private partnerships and using new technologies and social media to expand shared prosperity, enhance citizen security, and advance sustainable green growth in Costa Rica. His leadership in the usage of new media technologies won honorable mention from the State Department's Innovation in the Use of Technology Award Committee. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Eric Nelson.
Thank you, Niru, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning for Tech at State Mobile Diplomacy. We started off with a great welcome message from Ambassador Barzan and Undersecretary Novelli, and a broad tour of mobile with Mindel de la Torre. And now we have a distinguished panel to take us a little bit deeper into some of the issues that confront us as diplomats and development workers across the globe. So I'd like to introduce them to begin. At the far end of the table, we have Jerry Horton. Jerry is the chief architect of the Department of State. That's a new office within our Bureau of Information Resource Management. Jerry was formerly the CIO at USAID and also worked at the U.S. Mint and in industry, including Motorola. Next to him is Tiffany Sargent. Tiffany is the Senior Solutions Architect at Intel. Tiffany's career has spanned both technical and business areas at Intel Corporation for the past 20 years, nationally and internationally. She currently is in a senior technical senior technical contributor within Intel Federal LLC, focused on the Internet of Things and machine-to-machine, analytics, systems, and solutions architectures. In 2014, she was named by Connected World magazine as one of the women of machine-to-machine Internet of Things. Next to Tiffany is Tim Hoechst, the Chief Technical Officer at Agilex. He's a founder at Agilex, a Virginia-based IT services company. He's responsible for the research and development of new technology solutions. And he and Agilex have worked on mobile solutions with various federal agencies, including the VA, U.S. Postal Service, and Amtrak, and the Census Bureau. It's a pleasure to have him on our panel. Laura Walker Hudson is the Chief Executive Officer of the Social Impact Lab. Laura supports people and organizations around the world to use inclusive technologies to make systems and services more accessible, responsive, and resilient. Drawing on her expertise in humanitarian aid, human rights law, and international development, she brings a cross-disciplinary approach to communications, innovation, and information management. And finally, it's a pleasure to welcome Greg Starr, Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security. Mr. Starr is in charge of the security and law enforcement arm of the State Department. Diplomatic security is responsible for providing a safe and secure environment for the conduct of U.S. foreign policy throughout the world. He leads a force of special agents, diplomatic couriers, security engineering officers, security technical specialists, general service staff, and other specialists. From May 2009 until January 2013, Mr. Starr served as the United Nations Undersecretary General for Safety and Security. In that capacity, he oversaw the formulation of security, policies, and the implementation of programs to ensure the conduct of activities in a secure environment at UN headquarters and overseas locations around the globe. Mindel de la Torre took us back to the high level of what are the State Department's objectives in the world, and that's promoting security, democracy, and prosperity. And we titled this plenary panel today, Mobile is Changing the World. How will it change mobile diplomacy? And with this great bench of experts, we have an opportunity to take a little bit of a deeper dive into several of the issues that confront us, those being data, infrastructure, security, business practice, governance, innovation, and architecture. So I want to begin with a question to each of our panelists to bring a few themes to the conversation, and then we'll open the conversation and look forward to a good interchange. President Obama at the UN General Assembly 2 weeks ago now, on September 23rd, said, "Today, whether you live in downtown Manhattan or in my grandmother's village more than 200 miles from Nairobi, you can hold in your hand more information than the world's greatest libraries." Laura, from your perspective at SIMLab and your experience with them and Frontline SMS, what do you, across the wide range of technologies and appropriate technologies and status of mobile infrastructure, what future and current mobile technologies do you see as the most important for our diplomatic practice?
Well, thank you very much, Eric. So I want to take a slightly different, and thank you, a slightly different approach or a slightly different view, which is a little bit more the view from President Obama's grandmother's village, 200 miles from Nairobi. I was based in Nairobi for a couple of years and just back here in the world of much faster internet. And I was interested by some of the figures that were flying around this morning, quite a lot of them, right? One of them is the number of phone subscriptions in the world now, 7.2 billion, which is enough for everybody to have one. But actually, the other figure that we heard this morning is the number of actual unique subscribers, the number of people who actually have a phone connection of their own. And that number is somewhere around 3.6 billion, which is a much smaller number. And it's true that most developed world markets are saturated and that most of the growth here is in the developing world. So there's a lot to be positive about. We're also seeing that most of the growth in smartphone ownership is coming from the developing world in countries like Kenya. And Kenya, as many of you will know, is a very mobile-first, mobile-forward economy. Lots more connectivity there, lots more phone ownership, and of course, M-Pesa, Safaricom's mobile money system, mean that mobile adoption is really incentivized and is growing very fast. But I just want to, sound a note of caution, really, because when we talk about smartphone penetration, I was looking at news reports today that said that Kenya had something like 60 or 70% smartphone penetration. That's the same as the reported penetration of this country. So when we look at this, we have to think also, what are you talking about here? Are you talking about numbers of phones, or are you talking about numbers of people? Because that's different. And there actually isn't an easy way to tell how many Kenyans have access to smartphones, have access to phones that can easily access the internet. But one thing we can tell is how many people have access to power, to electricity. And speaking as the owner of an iPhone 4S that is 2 years old, I can tell you I'm quite worried about power supply to my phone right now, as I'm sure many of you are. Would anyone care to guess what percentage of Kenyans have access to electricity in their homes? 40? Any advance on 40? 30? It's 20. So those numbers don't add up, do they? How can you have a smartphone if you can't charge it? And of course, we have to charge them every day. And in many of these communities, traveling to charge a phone, which is what you have to do, and paying to charge a phone can be as expensive or more expensive than data, which is already a significant expense. So what do these people have? What do these communities have? Well, it's true that it's easy to get, or relatively easy to get an SMS through in most of Kenya. So unless you're really far off the beaten track, you can usually get enough signal to get an SMS through. So that's viable. Many Kenyans have feature phones, low-end Nokia phones, that kind of thing. And so voice telephony is also accessible, because let's not forget SMS requires you to be literate. And in fact, using a phone means you have to be technically literate. You have to be able to find the SMS on the phone, which if you've ever owned a Motorola, you will know can be quite challenging. So they also have almost universal access to radio. If you own a radio set, or there's someone in your village who has access to radio, it's a very popular medium, doesn't require literacy, free to access once you've powered the thing, and can be very widespread. So we should be thinking about actually this vast number and often underestimated number of people, most people who don't have access to the internet, and we should be including them in our strategies. And so the answer to your question, my long-winded answer, is I think we should be looking at inclusive technologies. So technologies that are relatively cheap, the hardware is cheap, it's cheap to run, things like radio, things like SMS, voice telephony, human networks. So we actually are working with the United Methodist Church to get messages to people in Sierra Leone and Liberia about Ebola and how to handle what the health risks are, and some useful health messages, not through SMS, not through mobile, but through their pastors. Because congregations don't have phones and they're not literate, but their pastors are. So we're using SMS to reach them, and then using human networks, using the pastors themselves to reach people on the ground in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So I think that, you know, if this group of people is important to the State Department and to the United States, then I think we need to be thinking about strategies that include them and don't exclude them further.
Thank you, Laura. Greg, last year around this time, you joined us at a Tech in State event where we talked about, we were celebrating 10 years of eDiplomacy's founding and 10 years of technological innovation in the department. And you talked a good bit about mobile and our advances in mobile. At that time, we were just beginning to roll out iPhones, and we started in Tripoli, where we had an urgent need for mobile communication, and BlackBerry was not a service offered. And you were happy to see that happening, and that BlackBerry 10 phones were coming online, and that we had truly smart phones. This morning, Kathy Novelli talked a lot about how pleased she is with her iPad, and Ambassador Barzan held up his BlackBerry 5. Tell us about what you see about where we are and where you'd like us to be, especially for helping diplomatic security protect us around the world.
Where we are is not where we'd like to be. I think all of us like to have instantaneous mobile communications in every setting. Where we're going is probably going to be less than that. Although we've made vast strides, we have installed wireless in more of our buildings now, on our campuses. We're looking at it in terms of how do we do libraries overseas, or U.S. public diplomacy installations, and allowing people to walk in with their mobile devices as opposed to leaving them, you know, outside. But there are still challenges. During the Africa Summit, we were asked to ensure that the participants of the Africa Summit in the Department of State could have their wireless devices with them, which we allowed, and they brought them in, and to have connectivity, which we turned on in the department. There's a trade-off, though, and I think we have to be aware that we still have trade-offs. Many people in the Department of State are saying now, to conduct diplomacy, not only do I need public diplomacy, but I need access to intelligence information more and more. And we're being asked to install more JWICS systems and sensitive TSSCI systems in our buildings. And there's conflicts when you have TSSCI information being processed and mobile information wirelessly that people want to process. During the Africa Summit, we had to actually take many of our offices in the Department of State and shut down our JWICS access for a couple of days during the conference to protect that type of data from the things that wireless routers and wireless signals can do to us. So we know that we've got conflicts, and what we're trying to do is do things like develop much lower power receiving and transmission sites that we can put throughout a building that don't jeopardize the JWICS systems while we have the ability to process mobile devices, or have them be effective. So I think there are challenges. I think what we really have to concentrate on the fact is that there are no silver bullets. We can't do everything all the time in every place. We have to know that we're not rolling back mobile technology. It's going to keep on coming. We have to be aware of the challenges that it presents, and we have to be nimble in balancing threats and risks, and accept certain risks for the benefits that we get from mobile technology. We can't accept every risk, but we need to be smart. We need to balance it.
Jerry, I know you're following very closely the same issue of just how can we access our systems through Wi-Fi, and how do we evolve to our architecture to support the new technological realities. Tell us about what we can look forward to and what kind of change the state is looking at, both the painful and the pleasant for the users. How do we need, what are the updates in architecture that we need?
Well, to sort of echo what Greg was speaking of, I think there is a lot of trade-offs that need to be made. I mean, there are risk assessments as you look at every type of architecture. Coming from USAID, we had a different business model in a lot of ways than the State Department. And you look across government, other agencies have differing business models. So the level of acceptance of risk kind of varies a lot by department. I would say that a lot of it is very uneven across government in general and at the State Department. Even from the perspective of having missions or posts around the world, some are much more forward-leaning than others. Some are very slow to look at technologies just because of where they are or what the risk assessments might be. So I think that we look at the shift as being very uneven in opposed to technology. And it's really not so much a blanket as it is like a patchwork quilt. So in understanding that, it's not a one-size-fits-all. I want to make sure that some people that are looking at an iPhone or an iPad or an Android tablet or whatever understand that in some places you just cannot do that. It was one of the trade-offs we made at USAID in a situation where, as Greg was saying, you wanted access to classified information. I left it up to the user. I mean, it's a decision that has to be made. Do you want wireless and mobile, or do you want access to this information? And that's an unfortunate situation to be in, but it's sort of the rules of being a federal agency. One of the things I try to talk to people about as we determine what an architecture or what a technology might be is that we're still a federal agency, and we still have to follow the rules, the laws, the regulations. I think from my experience at AID and in talking with a lot of other teams, I think where we're moving is that mobile will become much more of an enhancement to your daily work life. Certainly there's the personal aspects. Most of us have devices that are at least as capable, if not much, much more capable than what we get from work. So we're able to do our own personal email. We're able to touch Facebook. We're able to handle the social collaborations that we do outside of work. Within work, there's the information that we have to be able to manage and monitor. So sometimes there's a limitation on what we can do, but I think that as the State Department moves towards iPhones, that was one of my requirements coming over was that I wanted an iPhone. I didn't want to go backwards to an older BlackBerry. Some of the newer BlackBerries have some very great capabilities. Some of the Androids are amazing. But the flip side is, how do you use that in a work situation when people need to be outside of the embassy walls or the mission walls? So one of the experiences we had at AID was that we were dealing with partners, local government official, NGOs. So a lot of what we did is managing projects outside the embassy walls out in the field. A lot of times it would take people 2, 3, 4, 5 days to be able to visit a site, gather all the information, write a report. So what we were trying to do is to help them be more effective and efficient. As we started rolling out iPhones and iPads in particular, it allows somebody to go out to the field, do the interviews, take pictures, have a geophysical coordinate as to where that project was, be able to take video that could be uploaded to YouTube or internally depending on the security classification, and then be able to write their report on their way home. And it was really kind of fundamentally changing, and Haiti was one of our primary sites. It's because after the earthquake, as the 4G and LTE networks came up after that, there was a lot of great technology for people to be able to use. So we made sure that we gave them the opportunity to be able to do these things. And it means a lot to people on the ground overseas, but the flip side is, there's also the dangers that go along with that. Is somebody tracking you? Is somebody watching you? So I think that, wireless is certainly on our agenda. It's something that we're looking at both, small units to handle situations in between classified areas, but also large-scale wireless for places that do not have that requirement. At AID, I know that some of the other agencies, GSA is looking at wireless, and they've implemented across wide swaths of their buildings. So it's kind of in a catch-up mode at state from the perspective, but we're having to be very, very careful to do so. Certainly the devices, the access is there. I think the other big area that we have to do a lot of work, and is one of the things that Eric Nelson makes a lot of comments about, is making our information, our data, mobile friendly. It's not just giving somebody a device and saying, here, is being able to access that information. And a lot of times across a lot of agencies, not just state, the information is not searchable, it's not scrapable, it's not presentable. So I want to make sure that, as we look at how the information itself is being presented and given to people, that we have, obviously the security concerns, we also have the display issues. And then the final thing is just need. The issues of diplomacy around the world are changing. People want to be able to be out. If you're in a car for 2 or 3 hours in a city where the traffic is particularly bad, Cairo, Lima, wherever, to be able to do your email, to be able to catch up on whatever you're having to write is a huge time saver for you. So from the field perspective, there's a lot of the requirements that we're trying to gather and we want to make sure that we can address. So that need is really going to drive a lot of the technology pieces, and it's not, again, not the technology, it's not the black box, it's really how you manage information.
You're right, Jerry. Traffic is why we need to be mobile. I was talking to the our Consul General in Sao Paulo a few weeks ago, and he mentioned that he sits for 3 hours in his car to get to a 1-hour meeting in the city. So he definitely needs a mobile device that's friendly. Tiffany, we spoke briefly during the break, and you were very interested in Ambassador Barzin and Kathy Novelli's conversation, especially when Ambassador Barzin talked about computing at the edge. How does that ring bells for you?
So I'm really excited that the ambassador set up the Internet of Things on this panel when they were talking about computing at the edge. So I want to take you on a journey for the next few minutes to think broader than mobile phones when we think about mobility. So think about wearables, sensors that people could wear, or devices that are collecting data that then might be placed on a mobile vehicle. And so I want to basically coach some of the comments that I'm going to make broader than just the mobile phone, but they also do apply to the mobile phone as well. So when I think about what we're doing and where we're going with Internet of Things at Intel, we're really trying to push intelligence to the edge. So what does that really mean? So it's really bringing compute to the first point that you're collecting data and managing some of the compute actually on the device. So an example of this might be, instead of sending all of your data that you're collecting, whether it be on your phone or on a sensor or on a wearable, up to the cloud to do some computing or data management, you first look at placing some type of intelligence or application or compute right where you collect the data. So this could be on a smart sensor that's collecting environmental information. Instead of sending, data every 5 minutes up to the cloud, you may want to do some localized compute and send data less frequently that's more meaningful and more relevant to what you would like to accomplish. Additionally, you might want to think about, and I was at the Postal Service recently, what kind of data could you collect on postal trucks that are continuing to go the same routes? And you wouldn't, again, want to send all that data. You'd want to send what makes sense. And so one of the ways you can accomplish this, if you don't, let's say, have something that's smart already, is something that Intel's been working on, which is called the Gateway. And it's a small appliance, and it actually is an area that you can actually put intelligence on through algorithms or some data models, and they can be a variety of types of things. Currently you can do mathematics. In the future you'll be able to expand that to natural language processing to maybe solve some of the problems that Jerry talked about. And so when you think about that, we've developed even a chip called the Quark that is lower cost. And so, this is going to allow people to actually go to the next level of play. So you have an edge device, maybe it's a phone or a smart sensor. You've got this gateway, and then you can send the data up to the cloud. But if you don't want to do that, let's say on the gateway you want to actually just send it to a mobile device. Let's say you're a first responder or you're in the military, you don't want to have cloud access, or you don't have it. This provides additional compute opportunities. And the other piece that, I was talking to some of my colleagues on the panel at the break is around some of the challenges you have in the rest of the world. So let's say you are using a phone card in India, and you actually don't want to spend a lot of money sending data and information to folks when you only want to send a few critical pieces of information. This is, again, a use case where you can actually have more compute on the phone. Or let's say you have limited bandwidth or networks. You can store more information, let's say on a gateway, and hold it until you actually have compute. So we ran some use cases at Intel with one of our partners, and just to give you an impact statement, one of the commercial partners that we were looking at, and this can be translated, to any of the use cases or usage models you could think of for eDiplomacy, is that they were collecting 1 gigabyte of data per day and sending it over 3G. And when we put in a gateway with some intelligence and some compute, it was 3 to 5 megabytes per day. So you think about, not only are you impacting the cost, you're impacting the network, but also broader, when you think about these things, you're also starting to manage security a little bit differently. You may not be sending all the data forward. And so these are just some examples of, looking at opportunities and, also reducing your storage costs and overall challenges in the cloud. So when you think about some of these opportunities, the one thing that you want to make sure is that when you're designing these end-to-end solutions, where you're starting at a device or a phone and you're going to the cloud, you may be communicating across device to device or gateway to gateway or in a horizontal way, or you may be going edge to cloud. You also want to make sure that you're connected, you're managed, and you're secured. So in our strategies and platforms, we're designing it in that space. The other area I want to talk about, which has been loosely discussed this morning, is around interoperability. So as you start having different kinds of, let's say, wearables, and you have different mobile environments and different devices, you need to think about how data can actually be interoperable between systems, because a major expense of managing some of these, different, what you can call verticals, or different countries, or different organizations, or different critical infrastructures, is the data transformation. And NIST has done a really good thing recently, is they've stood up several working groups under cyber physical systems, and one focuses on data interoperability. And so this is something that I've been personally involved in, and I think it's a really good thing. But what also came to bear in some of the early discussions was that there was someone there from State Department who said, as you're talking about moving some of the data security to the actual data itself and in the metadata, you now can look at governance in a different way. And you can start putting basically policy at the data level. So if you, from one country, want to share data with another country, you might be able then to restrict it from someone able to send it forward to someone else that's undesirable. So, as Intel and many folks are looking at open interoperability as this Internet of Things is moving forward, NIST, for instance, in looking at data interoperability and starting to think about broader than the mobile phones is a really good thing. So I'll end here, but I'd like to put in a shameless pitch for the Internet of Things and Wearable panel this afternoon. I think there'll be some more deep dive discussions on these topics if you're interested.
Thank you. Not to be missed. Tim, Agilex has worked with several federal agencies on rolling out better mobile technologies, and I'd really appreciate if you would enlighten us with your experience with that transition from mobility as not just a communication device, but a resource for information, and not just a smartphone, but something that needs to change your business process.
So when we started Agilex, we started it with kind of a simple mission, which was to help the federal government leverage the value of information inside their mission. And 6 weeks later, Apple introduced the iPhone and changed the landscape for a whole new potential for realizing that vision and getting information to the people who need it where the mission is executed. And so very early on, we partnered with Apple and then later with Google and Microsoft to help define how federal organizations not only navigate the change that's been talked about a lot today, but more importantly, to recognize how much of it is not change, how much of it is good old-fashioned information systems, security, information systems, scalability, information systems, interoperability. And so since then, we have taken this effort to some of the organizations you mentioned in a wide domain of problems, some highly sensitive national security missions, all the way to doctors and patients at the VA viewing their health data at the bedside, or tracking homeless vets under bridges throughout the country, to census workers who, frankly, we're trying to design mobile applications for devices that do not yet exist, but will exist in 2020. And so how do they plan ahead for the day that they hire 300,000 people for 6 weeks and have it all work? All the way to maybe my best example, I think, that gets to your point about how this changes the business of government, which is at Amtrak. So if you've traveled on Amtrak and you've used an iPhone or Android device to get your ticket, or if the conductor has taken your ticket with an iPhone, we did all that work. And what's cool about it is it's a microcosm of everything that we're seeing in organizations in the federal government that are leveraging mobility. First, it's an old and traditional organization that has had a very simple business process, and those of you who've taken the train have seen it. A conductor will take your paper ticket and go click, click with a hole punch, tear it in half, and put half in his pocket and give you the other half. There is no mobile user interface we can possibly build that is going to be simpler than the old one, right? So that hole punch was a hard thing to go past because these conductors wanted something that made their mission easier. And we were only going to make it harder, no matter how swoopy our UI was. And so we had to give them information that they didn't already have, that their hole punch couldn't. Like, how many people got on at the last station? How many people are getting on at the next station? How many of them might need special help getting on the train? All kinds of information that made it more powerful for them. But that wasn't even really the real thing that we saw. We started to realize here, as we've seen throughout government, is that it's not about the app. It's not about how compelling the user experience is. Those are important things, but it's really about the enterprise information infrastructure and those systems and how ready they are, because most of these were not built with mobility in mind. If they are more than 5 years old, they were not designed with mobility in mind. At the VA, we're accessing a 35-year-old mumps-based electronic medical record. It was not designed with mobility in mind. So how do we build the information infrastructure, the security? How do we dumb data down so it's small enough for these platforms? How do we do all that in a secure way? And in Amtrak's case, not only did we have to get reservation information to the conductors, we had to get all of the reservation information on the conductors, because it's a unique kind of travel. Everybody gets on the vehicle and then it leaves, and then they start worrying about tickets. Whereas every other form of travel, you give a ticket before you're allowed on the vehicle. And so they didn't know who was going to be on that train. You had a ticket for this train or the next train or the last train, or you have a monthly pass. So we had to move all that information to the device, and they had to continue to work when they were disconnected. We talked a lot this morning about connectivity in remote parts of the world. Well, there are remote parts of this country, including under the Hudson River and tunnels and so on, where business has to continue. The old model, and this gets to the punchline that we're seeing, is it's not about making the experience more fun. That's neat. It does extend the reach of the mission. It's about changing the business process. For them, when they tore those tickets in half and he put it in his pocket, he would then go to the cafe car and spread them out and put rubber bands around different piles, and then they would FedEx them to a facility in the Midwest where they would data enter them into their system. It might be 10 days before they knew who was on which train. Think about the security implications if there was an accident. Just think of the accounts receivable problem that they have. Now they have real-time access to who's on what train. They know exactly who's there. They know exactly what tickets are outstanding. It has totally transformed the way they operate with their customers. We're seeing this with doctors at the VA. We're seeing this with border agents in Homeland Security. We're seeing this everywhere, where the organization is leveraging mobility not just to succumb to the demands of their user base that's saying, I need me an iPhone. They are doing it to really change the way they execute their mission. And when we're able to have that kind of impact, then we're proud to say that we're meeting that original goal that we set out to address. So I don't know if that answers your question, but probably over answers it.
I'd love to go further. I want to make sure you all have a good opportunity to chime in with each other, and I think one topic that everyone is very interested in is data. So I want to invite Laura to add another element to the data discussion that I don't think we often think about. You were blogging recently about the ethics of data.
Yeah. So this is new to us in some ways, and I speak here coming squarely from an organization that we work to support social change organizations. A lot of them are international NGOs or INGOs. We work with governments as well, and small NGOs. Really, we're really thinking about grassroots impact here. What do NGOs worry about? They worry about carrying out their mission. They worry about knowing whether they have carried out their mission and how it went. We're all trying lots of new things all the time, and we need to know whether any of them worked or didn't work, as in whether the whole approach, the whole methodology, not just tools, not just one element, but the whole picture. And if not, why not? What should we tweak? And that is just such a huge problem. So it means collecting a lot of data. A lot of the interventions themselves require, so anything health related, you end up with a lot of patient data. And there seems to be, I guess there's a difference. There's a kind of utilitarian approach at work when you're doing development work. You just want to get the intervention done. You want to get the information to the patient who needs to behave differently in order to save lives. And you don't think until later maybe about what you're doing with the data. So I was talking to an NGO last week and said, look, you are spending a lot more time and energy making sure that you follow legal regulation and ethical guidelines around what you do with data belonging to people who donate to you than you are with the people you're helping. So beneficiary data all over everyone's databases, what are we going to do with that? That's one question. How long do you keep it for? Do you delete it? What processes do you have in place? That's something we're just beginning to address, and it's actually a stark reminder that, in the NGO world, we think about first do no harm, but we're not thinking all the way through that. With these new technologies, we're just using them to do what we were doing before, but new stuff, better, faster. But we're not really necessarily thinking all the way through, well, this is a new paradigm that we're in now with data being hosted all over the world, maybe thousands of miles from where it was generated and thousands of miles from where the person who owns it originally lives. And that person may be in a very different setting. And the other thing, which I think maybe chimes in more with what you guys work on, is you also have the power, you do have the power to put people at risk with what you do with people's data. So an example from the developed world, when Google launched Google Buzz, they used Gmail information to automatically map people's contacts within the system and put that into people's Google Buzz profiles, and that wasn't clearly explained, or questionable permissions were given. And so the risk there is if you are communicating with someone and you don't want other people to know, so if you're seeking help from a service provider or trying to get out of a difficult situation, that was very visible suddenly publicly, and it was rolled back very fast. But the point is, there wasn't really that risk assessment, and I think that's another really important question, is if, regardless of our mission really, are we putting anyone in danger by not thinking through the full impact of what we do with data and information?
Can we chime in? That'd be great.
Please.
Jerry said something earlier about, and in the discussion this morning, there's this balance between risk avoidance and risk assessment and risk management, and mobility has lit a fire under this, I think, as it relates to not only the amount of data we gather, but how broadly we disseminate that data, and the speed at which people want to get more data because they can. Means the risk management question becomes a harder one to answer. And we're seeing, to your point, that different people are coming into it at different paces. We're seeing some that are saying, Yahoo, get all the data out there, and some, like at the VA, when we first did the first mobile pilot, we had doctors in the room, and we were just going to push patient data to the bedside. and it's very sensitive data that they take seriously. And we had the kickoff meeting, everybody was excited, and then you hear on the speakerphone, this is Joe from security. You can build whatever you want, but you ain't never putting it on our network. And the air came out of the room, and you realize that from the beginning, you had to engage the people who are responsible for protecting that data and do it in such a way that leverages the new technology but does not misuse it. And so in that case, we persist nothing on the mobile devices. We're not allowed to write it down locally on the device. So it's a totally connected solution. Doesn't work in every environment, but it just goes to show that everybody's temperament for risk management is different as it comes to this onslaught of data.
Craig.
Just, I think actually those are issues that between security, CISOs, the systems owners, we're all tackling, sometimes successfully, sometimes with less success. But Jerry said something earlier that I do want to go back to, because I think it's still an even larger vulnerability. You know, a 30-page report on paper or a 30-page report on a mobile device is still a 30-page report. Nobody reads it. Nobody gives a damn about it. And if we're going to talk about mobile diplomacy and the things that we're doing in the State Department, I want to point something out. I think the technicians, whether it be the people that own the system and are making the system work, and the people that are developing, you know, data points, things like that, and the security people, are progressing, and yet I don't think that the users are changing the way we do business. I don't think that there's an effort any place where we're picking up from the users, how should we be changing how we actually do diplomacy mobile? What does it really mean? It doesn't mean anything if all you're going to do is get inboxes full of emails with attachments on them that you don't read anyway. It doesn't mean anything if diplomacy is still 30, 60, 90, 150-page reports that nobody's reading. And I don't see where we're capturing from the people that are conducting diplomacy, how are we going to do it differently? We seem to be, I think, working the technical issues better than the larger issue of what are we doing? What does mobile diplomacy really mean?
Jerry, you have any thoughts to share?
Why is everybody looking at me?
Well, you know, the whole issue of where the data sits, and is it at rest on the device? Is it in the private cloud? These are all issues that you're looking at too. And for example, how can the private cloud, how important is that for our improving our mobility and our security?
Well, let me go back to what Greg was talking about too. It really is trying to understand what the process is. You know, it took me probably 2 years to understand a little of the process of development, much less, you know, exactly how the business operated. Then again, I'm not sure a lot of people there did understand the entire process. It was pretty different. But I think that the business of diplomacy, whatever those processes are, how do you enable those to work better using technology or information? And a lot of times that's a really hard thing to do. I mean, I go back to, I did a lot of time in manufacturing, and at the end of the day, we knew exactly how many bottle caps or coins or whatever we created. So we had really great metrics. But I would make a point, though, that and it's both a good thing and a bad thing. When I started out in IT at the time, you know, it was basically looking at the old Orange Book as our security Bible. You know, a lot of people don't even know what that meant, because it was really revolving around a lot of perimeter security. How do you defend a perimeter of mobile devices? And so the whole security architecture is having to change fairly dramatically. So, you know, one of the big things I talk about, you know, definitely is element level security, you know, actually at the data level. But it's really hard to do that when you don't really understand what the classification of your information is. You know, a lot of agencies are dealing with this fact that they don't know how to classify data. Users don't know. Even the CISOs don't always know, the security information security officers. So a lot of times it comes back to what does a user do? And, you know, to be honest, you know, my wife, who manages an IT department, says basically, you know, the problem usually exists between the keyboard and the chair. And it's really that kind of effort about how do you deal with, you know, the user's insecurity. I would make a key point, though. So one of the things about talking about technology is sort of the unintended consequences. So when at AID, I put out a list, or I asked everybody in the field, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 apps you have to have on every mobile device? And you know what came back? Waze. Number 1 by far. And I was kind of shocked. I was like kind of looking at it going, this is back before Google had bought them. They were an Israeli company. And I was trying to get across to people that, they're collecting your routes, right? They know exactly where you are at any time. But if you're in a Quito, if you're in a Lima, a Cairo, Jakarta, to find the quickest route between 2 points, I mean, literally, as Eric was saying, it can be 2, 3, 4 hours to get across a city. I was talking to a DCM, a Deputy Chief of Mission in Peru, and he was talking about every day he spent 3 hours going downtown for an hour or 2 meeting at the ministries, at the capital in Lima, and then 2 or 3 hours coming home. That was his day. So how do you make that more enabled? And I think that was really kind of going back to the, what is that information that you really need, which is why I think that the dealing with the railroad is so interesting. One last point, though, and Greg's probably going to kill me from here. So as part of an unintended consequence around social, around data, around information, the core networks are becoming less and less important. I won't say irrelevant, but I spent 3 years at AID, and I only logged in about once every 2 or 3 weeks to do my time in attendance. That was it. I never really logged into our network because everything we did was cloud-based. So more and more users are discovering that capability. So how do we manage that in a modern world with mobile devices? And it's really, even from an architecture, it's pretty scary. I think from the security side, it's shifting sand. So I'll leave it at that.
I want to comment on some of the conversations around business processes and how those basically nest with technology. One of the areas we've been focusing on in solution development, so as a solution architect, I just don't think about the technology. I think about who are all the users, what are all the actors. So actors could be anyone from maintaining the solution to be cost effective or cost of ownership down to all the different kinds of users that are out there that could be engaged. And so we've been actually working with anthropologists to go out and study how would people best use some of these solutions that are moving forward. And we've taken on what we've called a use case or usage model center approach to technology development. And I think that's really interesting. So you get these packets, we look at all the different actors, the use cases, how people are going to behave, how they want to behave. It's done through interviews, observations. And as we're starting to look at different opportunities, we're looking at is, why would you want to compute on the edge, or why would you want to compute on the cloud? This isn't just because we got this new edge device that we're interested in using. It's because there are a lot of different needs in business cases, and it's where things are moving to in terms of not logging in or logging into, a private cloud or so forth. So I wanted to bring that up as a strategy around technology development that I think is really important. And the other thing I want to go back to and just briefly talk about is we talked about risk. And I think we a lot of times are trying to mitigate risks in different ways. But I think one of the new areas and opportunities, and there are several government use cases in this, as people are thinking about is how to use mobile technology as a way to better manage risk. And an example is, if you've got cars that are driving over bridges, can you pick up vibration sensing and know that, hey, this bridge is healthier than another bridge, right? And this now doesn't require you to send out lots and lots of people to do inspections. You can actually start monitoring for where your risks are, or, hey, there's a chemical challenge someplace. We can do condition-based monitoring and look for anomalies. And so, I think you start opening up the realm of possibilities and opportunities now that you've got these new types of mobile solutions and new ways to collect data, and start to really look at synthesizing it. And instead of, sending a 50-page report up, really get into some new kinds of processing, also language-based, right? I mentioned earlier natural language-based processing, where you can look at, how to only pick the critical information and send it to the people that are probably going to want to use it.
I'd like to see that bridge data integrated into the Waze feed.
Yeah, you know, DOT has been talking about that use case, and we talked to several folks. There are a lot of new combinations, once again, the interoperability problems, but it's exciting to think about using mobility as a way to collect data for something real positive.
Greg, you know, security always looms large in these technologies, and Kathy Novelli talked about it this morning, and you already said, echoed her that we're not going back. Mobile technology is here to stay. But Kathy was talking about how the important thing is to stay one step ahead of the hackers. How do we not become how do we not go down the route of JP Morgan, Home Depot, and Target and others? And what does the user play in that role as well? Tell us a little bit about what the amount of effort that diplomatic security puts into that, to staying one step ahead.
The effort that diplomatic security does to protect the systems along with IRM is massive. We get pinged millions of times a day. We get attacked tens of thousands of times a day. Some of them are unsophisticated, some of them are incredibly sophisticated. Some are hackers, some are criminals, some are state enterprises that are trying to get our data. We have external attacks, we have internal attacks. And I think all of that, all those things that we have to deal with, there's a cadre of people that need to be dealing with that, and we need to make that pretty much invisible from the user. I do think that we actually do a fairly good job on it, but we also have to recognize that as technology improves, as new things are rolled out, new vulnerabilities are made, we may, in many cases, have to make changes in how we operate. There's a discussion underway now about a decision that was made 15 years ago by Colin Powell for the State Department that everybody was going to have access to the internet on their desktop over the OpenNet system. We may have to revisit that. 15 years ago, not everybody kept a mobile device with them. Not everybody had access to the internet in another way. The vulnerabilities that is posing to us are immense at this point, and we may have to change eventually the systems of what we do. We may make it invisible to the user, but it may actually be the internet's not actually on the OpenNet anymore. We may have to do things like that. So I think on the technical side, we need to make sure that we're funded adequately. We need to understand what the risks are. We need to make risk-managed decisions, not risk avoidance decisions. And I think we actually do a fairly good job of that. But you also touched on a subject that I think is something. When I said that most of this should be invisible to the users, people that carry the mobile devices, people that are using them, there are things that the users have to be careful about. And I think we actually need to start stressing that diplomatic users or mobile users actually need to be trained in tradecraft. I think everybody's aware at this point about how your credit cards get hacked, or how, you know, if you're not smart on a system, you get malware on it, they can get into your money. We talk constantly about what's going on in Hong Kong today with mobile uses, mobile devices, and crowdsourcing, and all the things that brings to us. I can assure you that the Chinese authorities are also making sure that they're picking up everything that they can, that they're using a lot of computer power to figure out where most of those messages are coming from, what networks are, who are the instigators behind this. The people that are best understand that they've got to be very careful about using devices today, groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda. They have an interest in that because they die if they don't take precautions. But how many others are aware that if you go to a meeting with somebody and somebody's controlling your cell phone, they can turn it on, this confidential meeting that you think you're having, you could be broadcasting the entire meeting to people that you don't want to hear it, or your location, or they're tracking you and whoever it is that you're meeting, and then go back days. So I think we're going to have to start putting programs together where we teach people mobile tradecraft from a security perspective. Let the technicians take care of the macro attacks on us and do the things that we need to do. but I also think that the users are going to have to get a lot smarter. I think people are about financial transactions now, but it's a much broader range of threats that as mobile use grows, people have got to be aware of.
Can I
Tim,
add one?
please.
At the risk of trying to describe a visual joke with words, I saw a funny cartoon just last week that had two panels. One said that hacking in the movies, and it had a crazed teenager spewing out jargon about firewalls and VPNs and so on. And then it said the second panel was hacking in real life, which was a dude on a telephone that said, "Hey, this is Joe from the password verification department." And that involvement that the users have in something as, I mean, most of these penetrations happen through this kind of social engineering more than technical engineering, and the kind of tradecraft at the high end, which is, you know, protecting your whereabouts when there are state actors involved. But even just at the low end, getting people to act more responsibly as we move information to them is a never-ending challenge we're going to have to continue to face. But it's the real deal as part of this problem.
I think this idea of educating users is so important, and I wonder how we'll do that without scaring the bejesus out of them. Because as Ambassador Barzan summarized the institutional lore of the State Department of what's the risk-reward equation on innovation, it's plus 10 points for a good new idea and minus 1,000 for a failure. So at the end of the day, we still have the obligation. We learned from the Africa bombings, and we learned from 9/11, the 9/11 Commission, that there is an urgent need to better share information. How we do that securely and how we do that comfortably to advance our mission without taking excessive risks is going to be a big challenge to us. And how we give people that little bit of space to innovate, I think, is a big challenge. If anybody wants to comment on that,
I thought when he said that, one thing that struck me is we government that the fear of making a mistake means we have to make more people involved. We have to take longer to make sure we get it right. And since we're taking longer, and since the procurement cycle of government is annual or multi-year, we better do it all this time, and we better make sure we get it right. And so now it's getting bigger and bigger, and we're taking 1,000-point steps rather than taking a lot of one-point steps. And so our success has been when we take lots of little incremental steps and build up to something. And sure, we make mistakes along the way, but they're small and easily fixed, rather than the traditional government MO, which is to try and get it all done in this procurement cycle, or else I probably won't have a job. And that means you're taking much more risky steps.
Laura.
I mean, so my job, both as a British person and usually is with the role I play with my organisation, is to say, well, this is actually really complicated and it's all a bit depressing. And I think as a panel, we've managed to get that across. But there is a lot to celebrate too. And although I was sort of saying, well, you know, don't forget the last mile, don't forget the low-tech people, that's true. But between the people who are joining the digital world, either through Facebook or more plausibly through SMS, which is the world's most broadly available digital communications medium, or through radio, there's more. You have more ability now as missions and embassies to reach communities and explain who you are and what you're thinking about and what you care about than you've ever had before. And I think you mentioned the human element. I mean, part of that is just being able to present yourselves positively, and you have more channels now to do that than ever before. It's just about using all of them and using them thoughtfully. And so I hope that in discussions through today, there'll be more time to talk about how you can do that positively.
Thank you, Laura. That's a great jumping off point to open the discussion to questions from the audience. And if you'd moderate
Yes.
those.
Thank you. That was wonderful. What a great discussion. And before we release our panel, folks at home, if you want to send us a question, you can just tweet #TechAtState, send it to us, and we'll share it here live with our panel. Do we have any questions from the audience? One down there.
So I'm interested to hear the talk about that we're moving to the data and the data talking to data. One of the things I'm wondering about is when will we start talking about smarter money? Because at some point in time, someone's going to be paying for this data. Right now, we're not taking, in effect, microtransactions without naming anything. I'm trying to bring up that there is a movement out there that it seems like it's going to collide with this. And so how is the government thinking about that?
Go ahead.
Actually, to answer a little bit of that, I think mobile transactions and especially electronic transactions are happening a lot faster in other parts of the world than maybe necessarily in the U.S. As someone who has actually had my credit cards stolen and used for various activities, it's interesting to watch how slowly some of the banks are moving, even to some of the newest technologies such as chip and PIN cards. So, but when you get into like transactions in, say, a Madagascar or something like Zambia, where most transactions for financial between people actually are handled on phones, you're starting to see that more and more. So hopefully the security around that will be built up. But companies like Orange, the French telecom, are putting a lot of emphasis on making those transactional changes. So in a lot of ways, we're dealing with old technology, in the concept of a credit card with a strip on it, as opposed to some sort of technology that ties it to a person, or some technology that would allow you to be able to track it. So beyond that, you get to mobile, and that's like a whole new world, especially in some of the developing countries, much like the way China bypassed landlines when they made the jump straight to cellular back in the day. A lot of countries now, as they're getting to the cell phones, which talks about the huge advantages that the mobile technologies are giving us in these kinds of places. They're making these jumps straight to electronic transactions on phones. So that really kind of makes a different view of the world. But then again, you get the same security concerns. The hackers are going to follow the money. So anyway.
Thank you, Jerry. Any other questions? Back here? Oh, in the front.
This is for Tim. I was really intrigued by your example of the tickets, that you, in giving that simple story, you were solving two problems, one for Amtrak and the other for the ticket takers. But usually when people want to automate something, they want to pave the cow path, or they think they do. But obviously your solutions took them past that. How did you carry the organization past that as you were providing that kind of automation, that information that was useful?
Well, conveniently, we were following an attempt that they had already made to pave the cow path. So the prior device that they had tried to do a mobile solution for the conductors included a belt with holsters and thermal printers and a big pre-iPhone kind of technology. And it gave us a taste for what this user community would accept, because they were returning the devices when they broke. And the way they broke was they were putting them on the tracks and literally returning the parts and saying it broke. So they rebelled against this kind of technology. So we went into it knowing we had to ingratiate ourselves with them as the ones that were going to make it successful or not. But also, the other thing that happened right when that project started is Amtrak said, okay, we're so excited and ready for mobility. We want to show you our whole service-oriented architecture. We've been getting the whole back end ready for just kind of this mobile ticketing stuff. And we said, great, but none of those services were available from the internet. And the trains are on the internet, they're out, they're not in the building. And so we had to kind of retool a lot of the back end stuff as well. And it really started to show them that all of their information systems, all of their business processes, the way their conductors interact, which is conductors are not ticket takers. Their job is to safely conduct the train to its destination, and they begrudgingly accept tickets. And so how to work all that together and use the catalyst of an exciting new device as the reason to change their business. But this story is about a changed business, not about a mobile phone, and that's why I enjoy it as an example.
Thank you, Tim. We have a question from those folks at home from Twitter.
Okay. Test. Okay, this is from Joel Wisner, who I don't think can talk right now. Question for the panel. A lot of talk about balancing mobile risk and benefits. How and with whom do we find that balance?
Anyone on the panel?
Maybe Mr.
Take one for the team.
Well, let's
Maybe Mr. Starr.
let's first say that it's an inexact science. How's that? I think every time we roll something out on a mobile platform, our first point of comparison is, because we've used them for so long, let's say the RIM BlackBerry, which I think is accepted pretty widely by businesses and by government as a fairly secure platform. We like to compare it to the 9-foot-high walls outside of U.S. embassies. They demark things, they do certain things, but yes, you can get over them if you're determined. You can get over RIM as well. When we were looking at Apple products and the layovers that we had to do to bring them up to a level that approached RIM's level of security, we didn't quite get there. But we also had to understand that people really wanted these products, that while RIM was beginning to roll out better products and do different things, there were expectations that we were going to get new types of products. And we knew that we weren't getting the same level of security that we were from the RIM products and the BlackBerry products in certain ways. But I think it was a combination of IRM and diplomatic security people that looked at this and said, what are the downsides? What are the upsides? What capabilities does this give us? I think one of the greatest things that we had was that we knew in certain places that the BlackBerry didn't work. We needed mobile communications and mobile technology in Libya, and it wasn't working there. So you weigh all these things and you make the best decision that you can, understanding that, you know, no system is perfect, and then you move on from there. If you find out that you've gone too far later on, that you've opened it up too wide, then you figure out how to tighten it up. Otherwise, you let it go. I don't have a really better explanation than that. It's not an analytical process where we've said, oh, this is a 5.6% risk and this is a 9.2% risk. There's a lot of unknowns, and sometimes you have to take a leap of faith.
Thank you. Question up front here.
Thank you. Leandra Bernstein, RIA Novosti. I wanted to ask a more general policy question because there's been a lot of discussion here about internet freedom, and Mr. Starr brought up the issue of ISIL, and so you have the example there of that group being shut out of social media sites, you know, for good reason, but also in other countries that see their national interests being subverted or disrupted by players. There's also attempts to crack down on internet freedom. So I was hoping for just some comments on those broader policy issues.
I see Tim smiling. I'm not sure who else is smiling. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so in terms of thinking about, well, just if I just speak very, very narrowly to my experience and then turn back to the rest of the panel, but just going back to this notion of risk, what we see very often is, for example, governments asking organizations to help them, so both reaching out to try and build relationships with the community and to win hearts and minds, and then also maybe to ask questions about predicting conflict and about identifying developments in regions that are hard to reach. What we've seen is I mean, SMS is not a secure technology. Social media, the other thing, I can't remember the name of the platform, but I did read about a platform recently that has been launched by, I think, The Guardian, which helps you to share information on social media, like photographs, or share information in a private way with newspaper organizations without revealing your location in the metadata by accident. This just comes back to me to if you are asking, and actually to all the services that we're talking about providing and asking people to participate in, very often we're dealing with populations who are at a severe knowledge disparity and power imbalance with both us and with other actors in the space. And by interacting incautiously or not providing full education and disclosure to populations who are perhaps being asked to provide information, or we potentially put them at risk. So I guess from my perspective, just thinking about populations who are in these areas, it's our job, if we're going to try and set up services and have communications channels open, to think about the fact that other actors in the space may be much more sophisticated than we think and much more sophisticated than populations in the area. I don't know how helpful that is in addressing your question directly. I'm sorry. Anyone else on
Thank
the
you,
panel?
Laura. Oh, one more, sorry.
You know, in general, internet freedom is, you know, a very important priority for American foreign policy, but just want to reference briefly that our office, eDiplomacy, turns that into action with a program we call tech camps, where we bring in civil society, get them to work with technologists to think about how do we utilize the freedoms that are available on the internet to generate change, especially in the area of democracy around the world. And yesterday we just wrapped up one in Bishkek, which is a part of a series on open government that the Community of Democracies is sponsoring. We did one a few years back in the Ukraine. Both of those created a good bit of opposition from governments that felt threatened. So if certain elements of the government feel threatened, we may be doing something right by promoting freedom of the internet.
Thank you, Eric. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions, but some of our plenary panel members should be here later on today if you still want to ask some questions. And yes, speaking of tech camps, wonderful. And the next one will be in Algeria? Jakarta. Thank you. All right, so let's give them a round of applause. They did an excellent job.